Chapter 3. It had been simple for Denny to learn Matt's room number. After he found Anita's address on the telephone directory, he called the school district office and asked which school kids in that area would attend. Next, he had called the school and said he was Matthew Schulter's uncle. "I want to send balloons to his classroom on his birthday," Denny had said, "but I don't know which room he's in." The student who had answered the phone looked up Matthew Schulter and then told Denny everything he needed to know, including what time all-day kindergarten started and let out, and where room 27 was located. She called the boy Matt rather than Matthew. Useful information. Jefferson School sat on the corner of Milton Street and 7th, a sprawling one-story structure that had overflowed its quota of children years ago, and now depended on portable buildings to house the extra students. For the last 3 days, Denny had parked in front of the school every afternoon in the line of cars that arrived to pick up children who spilled out the doors like popcorn from a popper promptly at 2:36. Until now, Denny had left the school by himself. Today, he would have a passenger. Denny glanced at the car's clock. 2:23. He was right on schedule. The first day, Denny had wondered how he would know which one was Matt. It seemed impossible that he wouldn't know his own son, but one kid looked pretty much like the next to Denny, and he'd never actually met Matt or even seen any pictures of him. He hadn't wanted to until recently. Maybe the kid resembled him. Tim and Thomas, Denny's nephews, looked a lot like Denny's brother-in-law, Winston, so Matt would probably look like Denny. The boy might be a real chip off the old block, Denny had thought, and I'll know him the second I see him. He had watched the children rush outside, but none of them had seemed even slightly familiar. Maybe Matt was absent. As Denny watched the children line up for the school buses or head to the waiting cars, he saw Bonnie join a small blonde boy in the second bus line. Denny hadn't seen Bonnie since the divorce, but she had been 6 or 7 during his brief marriage to her mother, so he recognized her instantly. She was taller, of course, and more slender, but she still had thick, curly brown hair and a lopsided smile. The boy showed Bonnie a drawing, and she gave him a thumbs up. Denny stared at the boy with Bonnie. He wore a Donald Duck t-shirt and jeans. That must be him, Denny thought. That's Matt. That's my son. The same scene repeated the next day and the next as Denny parked near the school, watched for Matt, and made his plans. After the second day, Denny knew which boy was Matt even before Bonnie came. Matt always arrived first and got in line. Then Bonnie dashed across the playground and rode home with him. The trick would be to coax Matt into the car quickly without alarming the bus driver or the other kids and drive away before Bonnie got there. He planned to wait outside room 27 and intercept Matt the second he emerged. Denny had come back to the school one night and walked around, deciding where to park so he wouldn't be seen by other parents or the bus drivers. That's when he saw the notice on the front door. All school visitors must sign in at the office and get a visitor's badge. He couldn't take a chance on being stopped for not wearing a badge, but he didn't want to sign in either. Denny had soon figured out what to do. Now he was finally putting his plan into motion. He had rehearsed the whole thing in his mind so many times that when he began to do it for real, he felt as if he were merely repeating actions he had already taken. Instead of parking where the parents lined up, he stopped on the side street, close to the door Matt always comes out. He opened the trunk of his car, then he took out a clipboard and a cardboard box, addressed the school library. Carrying the box under one arm, he walked around the front entrance, past the flagpole, and into the school. "UPS," he said to the woman behind the counter. "I have a delivery for the library." The woman glanced at his brown uniform. "You need to sign in, please," she said, "and wear a visitor's badge. The library's down the hall and on your left." Denny scrawled UPS on the sign-in ledger, thanked the woman, hung the badge around his neck, and walked out of the office. Instead of heading for the library, he went straight for the door at the end of the hall, the one next to room 27. Something happened that Denny had not planned for, a lucky break he had never imagined as he mentally rehearsed this day's activities. The door of room 27 opened, and Matt stepped into the hallway. He closed the door behind him and headed straight toward Denny. "Matt!" Denny said. "I'm going to the bathroom," Matt said. He held a piece of yellow paper toward Denny. "I have a hall pass." "I was coming to get you out of class," Denny said. "You're supposed to come with me right now." The boy shook his head, frowning. "It's an emergency," Denny said. "Pookie got hurt, and I'm taking him to the vet. Your mom wants you to go along so Pookie won't be scared." Matt's eyes grew wide. "Pookie's hurt?" "He got hit by a car. I stopped to help, and when I called the number on Pookie's tag, your mom asked me to get you and then take Pookie to the vet. She's going to meet us there." Then he held out his hand to Matt. "We have to hurry." Matt shook his head again, putting his own hands behind his back. "I don't know you," he said. He took a step backward. "I'm not supposed to go anywhere with someone I don't know." "You're right to be cautious," Denny said. "It shows you're a smart kid." "But I checked in at the office. See my visitor's badge? That's how I knew where to find you. If you walk outside with me, you can see my car from the playground. You'll see I'm helping Pookie." Denny went to the door, holding it open for Matt. Matt followed Denny out the door to the playground. Denny pointed. "That's my car," he said. "Pookie's in the back seat." Matt looked toward the green sedan. He saw the dog's nose pressed against the side of the window of the man's car. "Pookie," Matt said. "How bad is he hurt? Are his legs broken? Is he all bloodied? Is he going to die?" "He might if we don't get him to the vet right away." "Pookie's scared. He needs you to ride along to the vet so he won't be afraid." He extended his hand again. Matt hesitated, glanced again at the dog, took the man's hand. Together, they ran across the playground toward the street. While the boy climbed in beside the dog, Denny tossed the box and the clipboard in the trunk, his heart thumping in triumph. His plan had worked perfectly. The woman in the school office had never suspected that fake UPS logo that had been stitched on last night by Denny himself. Matt had seen the dog in the car and left the school without a whimper. As Matt hugged Pookie in the back seat, Denny started the engine and drove away, being careful to stay within the speed limit. The last thing he needed was to get pulled over for a traffic violation. He rounded the corner as the first school bus pulled into the drive. The car clock said 2:34. Chapter 4. By the time Bonnie got to her last class of the day, her mood had brightened. Friday afternoons always felt full of promise, even if she had no special plans for the weekend. After she finished her math assignment, Nancy slipped her a note. "Can you leave baby brother with your neighbor and go to the mall with Sharon and me after school? Mom's driving us. We're going to try on shoes and get free makeup samples." Bonnie sighed. She would love to go shopping with Nancy and her sister, but she wasn't supposed to ask Mrs. Winston, her neighbor, to watch Matt, unless it was an emergency. She wrote, "I have to stay with Matt. Lucky me. Bring me some samples. My face needs all the help it can get." She passed the note back to Nancy. Bonnie often wished she had an older sister instead of a younger brother. Sharon helped Nancy with homework and hairstyles, taught her the latest dances, and let Nancy listen to her CDs. Best of all, Nancy never had to be in charge of anyone but herself. Last year in 6th grade, Bonnie and Nancy often hung out together after school. They'd go to the library or talk with their friends for a little while before they walked home. Matt was in daycare then, and Mom picked him up after work, so Bonnie didn't have to worry about him. This year, with Matt in all-day kindergarten, Bonnie had to hurry from the middle school to the adjoining elementary school as soon as the final bell rang. She rode the bus home with Matt and took care of him until Mom arrived. Bonnie knew it was important to watch Matt after school. She knew she saved Mom a lot of money each month. She also knew it was a pain. Matt always wanted to practice pitching a baseball with Bonnie as the catcher. If she didn't catch for him, Matt threw the tennis ball against the garage door for hours at a time. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Each thwack left a faint round green spot from the tennis ball's fuzz. The Schulters had the only house in town with a polka dot garage door. The final bell rang at 2:36. Bonnie could never figure out why it was 2:30 or why it wasn't 2:30 or 2:45. An example of adults setting rules that don't make sense. Bonnie slipped her backpack on and hurried toward the school library. She had 2 books due and didn't want to owe a fine. After dropping the books off, she'd head across the ball field toward Matt's school. She arrived as the lines of students began boarding the yellow school buses. Her eyes darted from front to back of the second bus line, but she didn't see Matt. She went to the bus door and called into the driver. "Is Matt already on the bus?" "Haven't seen him," the driver replied. Bonnie frowned. Wouldn't you know it, the one day she didn't come straight to the bus, Matt wasn't there. Maybe he stayed after school to help Miss Jules. She rushed to room 27. Miss Jules was pinning new material on the bulletin board. "Do you know where Matt is?" Bonnie asked. "He isn't in the bus line." "He got a hall pass to go to the bathroom a few minutes before school got out. I let him leave because he said he couldn't wait, and when he didn't come back to class, I assumed he went straight to the bus." "He isn't there," Bonnie said. "I'll look in the boys' restroom," Mrs. Jules said. Sometimes Matt stands in front of the mirror pretending he's pitching a baseball and forgets the time. Bonnie nodded. Matt did that at home, too. It drove her nuts when she was waiting to use the bathroom herself. Mrs. Jules cracked the restroom door and called, "Anybody in there?" When there was no answer, she went in. Seconds later, she came out. "He isn't in there. Let's check the bus again." This time, Bonnie boarded the bus, looking at all the passengers. Matt wasn't there. As soon as she got off, the doors wheezed shut. The first bus in line pulled out of the school driveway. Bonnie's bus followed. "You checked the playground?" Mrs. Jules said. "I'm going to the office to alert Mr. Quinn." Bonnie nodded. She rushed to the playground and looked at the monkey bars, the ball field, and the basketball court. No Matt. She ran to the office where Mr. Quinn, the principal, was speaking over the public address system, alerting all teachers that Matt Schulter had not boarded his bus. "If you see Matt," Mr. Quinn said into the microphone, "bring him to the office immediately." He clicked off the mic and turned to Bonnie. "Has he ever done this before?" he asked. Bonnie shook her head no. Once he was late because he goofed around with his friends, but Mom scolded him, and since then, Matt has always gone straight to the bus. He gets there before I do. "Maybe he went home with a friend today, and your mother forgot to tell you." "Mom would never forget," Bonnie said. "She always makes sure we know what we're supposed to do after school." "Let's call her to be sure," Mr. Quinn said. "Do you know her work number?" Bonnie gave it. Her insides felt hollow as she listened to Mr. Quinn ask for Miss Schulter. A few seconds later, he identified himself and said, "Matt didn't get on the school bus today, and we can't find him. Did he go home with a friend?" He talked another minute or so. When he hung up, he said, "She's on her way. Matt was supposed to go home as usual." "I don't like this," Miss Jules said. Apprehension crawled up Bonnie's arm and across the back of her neck. "Let's not panic yet," Mr. Quinn said. "I've had situations before when youngsters gets into trouble at school and doesn't want to go home, or they get invited to play at a friend's house and forget to call. Sometimes, especially with kindergartners, they get on the wrong bus. Then they have to ride the whole route before they're brought back here. One student fell asleep on the bus and wasn't found until the driver had already parked the bus in the barn." Bonnie could easily have disputed each of Mr. Quinn's theories. Matt never got in trouble at school, and he wasn't allowed to go anywhere with a friend unless Mom had arranged it. Certainly he wouldn't have boarded the wrong bus. They had ridden bus number 2 all year. She didn't argue with the principal, though. It was Mr. Quinn's first year at this school, so he didn't know Bonnie. She knew he was only trying to make everyone feel more optimistic. While Bonnie looked out the office window, hoping to see Matt approach, Mr. Quinn called each of the bus drivers. Matt was not on any of the buses. The black fog of Bonnie's old dream seemed to hover at the edge of the schoolyard.